This winter has been a stark reminder for most New Yorkers about the rising costs of energy, and now a report from the New York Independent System Operator, the state's independent monitor of the electric grid, looks at the factors contributing to rising wholesale electricity prices in the Empire State. To discuss these findings and how they should steer state policy, we're joined on the Capitol Press Room by Kevin Lanahan, the organization's Senior Vice President for Corporate Communications and External Affairs. Welcome back to the show, Kevin.
Pleasure to be back with you, David. Thanks.
So first off, what is the connection between wholesale electricity prices and what New York residents or businesses are paying for electricity right now? Because I have to imagine if I'm a listener, my first question is, why does this white paper matter to me?
Yeah, of course. And especially with rising prices, we get that question a lot. So happy to try and unpack it. On a 12-month average, your utility bill is broken up into two big chunks. One, approximately two-thirds of the bill are those retail costs. Everything the utility is going to charge to help run the business, plus some profit. There's taxes and fees built into that side of the bill. The remainder, about a third, is what we call the supply charge. That's the actual commodity, the electricity itself, not the natural gas that you may use to heat your home, but the electricity that you're using to power your phone, turn the lights on. Inside of that supply charge, and again, this is for the cost of the electricity that's consumed, the utilities are required to do a lot of hedging. It's a fancy word that really is sort of an insurance policy, buying electricity commodity well ahead of time to when it may be consumed to help guard against things like we just saw last week when it gets really cold and the price is driven up. Then there's a certain portion inside of that supply charge that's derived by the competitive electric markets. And those are the markets subject to the laws of supply and demand that we administer, oversee, and make sure are operating correctly.
Hmm.
And that's where we can see a lot of fluctuation and volatility in the price, again, because of the laws of supply and demand, but also weather. And when it gets really cold, people are using a lot more, not just here in New York, as we saw with the recent spike, but across almost the entire eastern half of the country. So when there's a great amount of demand for natural gas, which is a major cost driver, the cost of electricity also goes up. Consumers then open up their bill. They see that supply charge has grown. They have questions. And that's one of the things that we prize about our role and responsibility at the ISO. We're here to help try and answer those questions about what is driving the cost up. As I mentioned, and I'll pause here for a second, but the biggest cost driver is the cost of natural gas that the generators are consuming in order to produce the electrons that people are consuming. So we're converting one form of energy, the natural gas, into electricity.
Well, yeah, you examined that link between electricity costs and natural gas, which is the primary fuel source for about half of the electricity generated in New York. What is that relationship?
Yeah, as you mentioned, about half of our generation fleet uses natural gas to produce those electrons. There are a number of generating assets that also have the ability to burn oil when necessary. And when we get into really cold weather and the price of natural gas spikes, it's helpful to have them switch over to oil from an economics benefit. But that also has a reliability benefit when they have that alternative to switch over to oil, since natural gas consumption is widespread. And the first customers on the natural gas system to get that capacity in those moments are residential consumers. This is a health and safety benefit, of course. People need to heat their homes when temperature's 0 or below. The generators are next. So when it's beneficial, those generators that do have the option can switch over to oil, usually at a lower cost than the gas in real time, also a reliability benefit. But they can only do so for so long because those fuel oil tanks only can carry so much. So when we get into running the system and operating the system reliably in winter, our control room operators are always cognizant of which generators have that ability to switch between fuels, and then as we go through the event, how much oil is left in those tanks. And when they get low, then the option starts to diminish and they will have to switch over to natural gas. And in those moments, it's usually when the price of natural gas is extraordinarily high, again, demand being extraordinarily high, and that price is built into the supply charge that the consumer ends up paying.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about what the trends are in terms of the cost of natural
Mm.
gas, but can you sort of flesh out a little bit more how the price of natural gas informs the overall price of electricity? Because I've seen some frame it as wholesale electricity prices being set at the margins by gas, but
Mhm.
I'm curious if it is more of a driver than that and whether other sources of energy are responsive to the natural gas prices as well.
So when we say that the natural gas generation sets the price, it's often the case, and it's because those are the units that we're taking in last in order to meet the demand. So we're definitely taking in when it's available, plenty of solar and wind, and the cost of the of that fuel is free because it's Mother Nature,
And the expression when it's available does a lot of work in that sentence.
right? And then of course nuclear. We have plenty of hydro, which also is an expensive resource. And the natural gas units will typically come in after that from a pricing perspective because they're more expensive because of that natural gas cost. So they're usually setting the price. The other point to highlight here is that the variety of resources we have to draw from, hydro, nuclear, behind the meter solar, and some increasing amounts of utility scale solar, but that's been slow, and wind give us, from a reliability perspective, a lot of benefit because we can rely on that variety. If one is not available, then we have the other. It's also helpful to smooth out the price with a different um, and healthy variety of resources. So when we think about, and we haven't really touched on just the simple laws of supply and demand that are driving the cost of electricity here, but when we think about reliability, having a variety of resources is also a significant benefit. We want more of all of that diversity so that we can build out a system to meet the forecasted demand on a going forward basis. But we're already seeing that demand show up in how we run the system. The winter peak demand in 24 was higher than 23, and it was higher in 25 than 24, just as we predicted a number of years ago. So when we look at forecasts of possible peaks and demand going forward in the next 5 years, even, we're going to need more resources. And our position is we should be investing in all of those resources I mentioned. The renewables, yeah, we're looking at, the state is looking at nuclear, but we also should take a look at the opportunities to invest in and repower those old natural gas units that are setting that price at the margin. And if we do replace some of the old natural gas units that help set that price with newer, more efficient units that use less gas but produce more electrons, that should over time bring the price down.
Yeah, I want to flesh that out. And you sort of just made the case for this, but the cost of natural gas has been going up. And while it's framed by proponents as the cheaper alternative compared to something like wind or other renewables, which, as you pointed out, once they're up and running, it's, basically free. Why is this a good time to still invest in natural gas? Why is there an expectation that by having a newer facility or just the latest technology when it comes to natural gas, there can be savings down the road? You talked about, I guess, inefficiencies in some of these older operations, but is there a guarantee of natural gas becoming more affordable down the road?
It's hard to say that there's a guarantee of anything right now in terms of the investments. What we do stand on with a lot of confidence is that the demand is going to rise. Like I said a moment ago, we've already seen the demand go up. Mostly now, the demand that we're experiencing is because of electrification. So we're electrifying buildings with heat
Hmm.
pumps, and we're electrifying the transportation sector with electric vehicles. We're starting to see that show up. in real-time peaks. And so, to your question, in order to address that on a going forward basis, now's the time to begin to make investment choices. If we wait to make those investments, we're one, going to experience continued supply chain issues. Developers are having trouble getting the kind of materials they need on a global basis to invest in infrastructure. Two, there is global national demand for the cutting edge, clean fossil generators rolling off the assembly line by GE Vernova, not just here in the United States, but we understand also in parts of the globe like the Middle East, where we haven't seen that kind of investment before. So we've got to get in line and start moving forward on making those decisions. If we fail to add capacity on a going forward basis, but the demand continues to rise, we have great concerns about operating the system under those conditions. So that's the reliability piece. But certainly the price will also continue to go up. It's just the simple laws. If we are adding demand, but supply is not there, then the price will go up. The last point on this to keep in mind is that the incumbent units that are setting the price, especially in those high demand moments like we experienced a couple of weeks ago, those natural gas units are quite old. We've talked about this before on your program, 55, 60, sometimes more than 70 years old. They take a lot to keep running. They are significantly less efficient than the cutting edge technology we have today. They use more gas than the cutting edge technology today. So it's both a reliability, acute reliability issue and a long-term price issue.
And after a quick break, we'll continue our conversation about what's driving wholesale electricity prices in New York with Kevin Lanahan, the Senior Vice President for Corporate Communications and External Affairs at the New York Independent System Operator. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're continuing to unpack a report from the New York Independent System Operator, which looked at some of the factors that are contributing to rising wholesale electricity prices in the Empire State, and we're considering what this means for New Yorkers and how the system can be addressed. Our guest is Kevin Lanahan, the organization's Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications and External Affairs. So you talk about building out the capacity now, although it seems like this is an issue for 5 or 10 or 15 years earlier, especially as we were decommissioning power sources like Indian Point. So if we are trying to expand capacity as fast as possible, is there one form of energy that you think makes the most sense? Is there something that can have the largest footprint when it comes to supply, the fastest?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult question to answer in terms of speed to market. The simple answer is that building all of these resources, none of it is quick. It's
Sure.
high capital intense industry, and a lot of capital is necessary to build these plants, whether it's wind, offshore wind, terrestrial wind, whether it's utility scale solar versus fossil. We'll take every megawatt we can get from any resources we can get it. We just want to add more capacity to the system to meet the rising demand reliably.
But
Um,
there's not one that you think gets done faster or more reliably or maybe with less state subsidies?
well, I'll speak to the reliability aspect that you just focused on because that's our business. So we do look at the cutting edge fossil generation that's being bought and installed today as incredibly efficient, but also reliable. And dispatchable is the word that we use. So that means
Mhm.
the control room operators have a great degree of control over it. They call on that unit that has that technology. They know it can be there. It can, and we need a system going forward that's more flexible to respond to for instance when the wind drops off or the solar does drop off, we have something that can move in behind it, make up for that coming delta and supply the consumer. So natural gas technology, the clean, cutting edge new gas technology is definitely more flexible as well.
So one of the things your report highlights is that the country is exporting natural gas more than I think residential consumers are utilizing. Are you making any recommendations on how that dynamic looks moving forward? Are you encouraging federal policymakers or state policymakers or businesses to keep more of this at home? Or is there really no benefit at the end to the ratepayers for where that natural gas ends up?
Yeah, the natural gas commodity is affected. It's a global market, so it's affected by a great many things. Um, Much of it comes from the Gulf and Louisiana, Mississippi area, and then the network flows north from there along the eastern seaboard. We're almost last in that network once we finally get the molecules, the gas, here to burn in your furnace. You're almost last on that system. New England is after us.
Is that because of geography or something that New York regulators do or something about pipelines? Why are we last? Did Kathy Hochul somebody off?
It's just the way the system has been built up over time based on where the gas is located. And there's is historically, traditionally been a great amount of it down in the Gulf. There's also plenty of it in the East, or in the Rockies. And it comes down out of the Canadian Rockies and then east over again, to where the large population centers are for the consumption. So it's just the way the network has been built up over time based on where it's pulled out. So it means that the transportation costs on top of getting those molecules over here is more than it is if somebody's consuming that gas, like we saw a couple weeks ago in the Carolinas, for instance. So that's something to keep in mind. The in the paper we issued talks about this. I mentioned it's a global market that sets the cost for natural gas. Well, Europe, since Russia invaded Ukraine, has been building out their electric system and purchasing lots of liquid natural gas that we have been exporting over there to avoid reliance on Russian gas, Gazprom. So the more that they're consuming and the more that we're shipping over there to be consumed has driven up the price here at home as well.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Kevin Lanahan, who does corporate communications and external affairs for the New York Independent Monitor of the Electric Grid. Well, given that this is a global market you've been talking about, why isn't the preference when it comes to future power generation the power that we can create and reliably use here in New York, like those renewables or potentially nuclear, like the governor is looking to advance?
So we're really encouraged by and definitely very supportive of the governor's pursuit of nuclear. But we are also incredibly supportive of building out more wind, and behind the meter solar has been robust. That's been extremely helpful, especially in the June heat wave that we saw last summer. But that solar wasn't there as we would normally have a couple weeks ago during the cold snap. The 12 to 24 inches of snow fell on the solar panels, and then
We
it
can't
was,
send people out with brooms to take care of that.
well, hearing a lot about that. But that's a lot of people with a lot of brooms to brush off a lot of snow. And
Kids on snow days.
when you and I were kids, we would go out with a shovel and earn a few bucks. But in this case, for at least a day, but really more, there was almost no behind the meter solar. On the extended period of the cold snap, 6, 7 days, it started to come back, but came back slowly. So we need that behind the meter solar to continue to grow. We need more terrestrial wind. We are looking forward to the additional offshore wind that's coming in with the two projects in flight. And again, I keep saying we are, from our perspective, operating the grid and then also looking at the pricing in the markets, we want all of those resources to show up robustly um, to meet the increase in demand that we're forecasting.
So, is there anything right now when you look at the regulatory landscape in New York or existing statutes that hinder the implementation of the recommendations that you're calling for?
So we hear from developers, there's two items that we really need to focus on. One is the amortization schedule that's influenced by public policy. Developers are concerned that there may not be enough money to invest in generation here in New York.
Like
And
they're not
then,
going to have access to capital?
no, it's more like how much time do the state policies allow them to earn their investment back?
And is it too long or too short?
Too short. And the second item that we hear from developers is the permitting environment.
Wait, they didn't get the press release that ORES and the PSC has solved everything and that permitting is going to be a breathe now?
Um, when a developer goes looking for that capital, the capital markets are looking for lots of certainty to put that money. And we have to be cognizant that the issues that we're facing here are being experienced virtually across the country and exacerbated by global markets. So we're in competition for that investment. The capital markets are going to put their money where there's great certainty. Right now, there's a lot of build out in Texas. There's plenty of build out in places like Virginia, Georgia. We got to get in the game. We got to compete for that capital, that investment, and new resources to make sure the system stays reliable and over time, smooth out the price for the consumer.
Well, we've been speaking with Kevin Lanahan. He is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications and External Affairs for the state's independent monitor of the electric grid, the New York Independent System Operator. Kevin, thank you as always for making the time.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, David.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.